In the Come Follow Me lessons this last week, we covered 3rd Nephi chapters 8 through 11, which in the Book of Mormon covers the time period in the Americas at the time that Christ died. And as we know from the Book of Mormon, when Christ died, there were destructions that occurred and that are described in those chapters. Now, one of the interesting things that it says in those chapters is that when Christ died, when the destruction occurred, it said that the Nephites could have no light. They tried to start fires, but despite their best efforts to start fire, they couldn't start any fires. In this video, I want to present a possible scientific explanation for why that could be, and also show how that's something that Joseph Smith couldn't have known and is additional evidence, therefore, for the Book of Mormon. To do this, I'm going to show some slides. Okay, so first let's look at the verses involved in 3rd Nephi. In 3rd Nephi chapter 8, as it describes, there were storms and earthquakes at the time of Christ's death. This caused a thick vapor of darkness, and it says that the Nephites were unable to start any fires, even with fine and dry wood. And then the question, is there any scientific explanation for an inability to start fire? Because this would have been something that would have been considered scientifically a surprise, or something that would have been a surprise for Joseph Smith. Okay, so in 3rd Nephi chapter 8, if you read those verses 20 through 22, it says, "And it came to pass that there was a thick darkness upon all the face of the land, insomuch that the inhabitants thereof who had not fallen could feel the vapor of darkness." Again, this was a vapor of darkness that occurred immediately after the storms and earthquakes that were described, and the fires. Various cities caught fire. There was continual earthquakes and storms. And it says, "There could be no light because of the darkness, neither candles, neither torches, neither could there be fire kindled with their fine and exceedingly dry wood, so that there could not be any light at all, and there was not any light seen, neither fire, so great were the mists of darkness which were upon the face of the land." Now, this is something that would seem strange, an inability to start a fire in particular for someone like Joseph Smith or for the Nephites. They're unlikely to have encountered a situation before where you could not start a fire even with, fine and exceedingly dry wood, like they describe here. But it is something that is scientifically possible. Let me give you some information on that. Okay. Now, fire has three requirements. You need three things for fire. This includes fuel, heat, and oxygen. Fuel could be the wood. Heat, for example, for starting a fire could come from friction or other sources. And then you need oxygen. Now, for the Nephites and Joseph Smith, they would not know the difference between air and oxygen, but air and oxygen are not synonymous. Oxygen is only one component of air. Air has at sea level, about 20.9% concentration oxygen. So oxygen is a portion of the air. The rest is made up of nitrogen and other things. But what you need for fire is not just air. You need the oxygen that's in the air. It's the oxygen that is in the air that is critical for fire. Joseph Smith and Nephites, they would not have understood that. So in situations where the air has a very low oxygen concentration, you can have a situation where it becomes very hard or even impossible to start a fire. There are a couple of examples of this that we know from modern technology. For example, in diesel engines, you have that combustion that starts, which is the fire that's triggered inside the combustion chambers. For emissions reasons, many diesel engines have to reuse the air that was there with the combustion from the prior explosion, the combustion that occurred in the engine. What this does is it reduces the oxygen concentration that's in the air. Now, what they have found as they started using, for emissions purposes, started reusing the air that was in the cylinder, is that when the oxygen concentration dips below 16%, it starts to become very hard to maintain good combustion in the engines. And it essentially becomes impossible to maintain combustion when the oxygen concentration falls below 12%. And this ends up applying for outside of diesel engine environments too. What they have found through experiments is that being able to start and maintain a fire becomes extremely difficult below 16% oxygen concentration. Having found this, there have been some people who have explored the possibility of fire suppression systems with a lower oxygen concentration level. Here on the screen is an example of a patent application for somebody who came up with a fire suppression system using this kind of low oxygen concentrations. Now, the question might be, well, but yeah, if you have low oxygen concentration, maybe you can get it to where you can't start a fire, but then people can't breathe in it. Well, that's not quite true. People can still breathe fine at lower levels than where the fire can start. So in experiments, again, people can still breathe fine at lower levels down to below 10% oxygen concentration. But what happens when you're breathing that lower oxygen concentration is you start to get lethargic and start not thinking clearly, and you start to have issues like that. Which, interestingly, in 3rd Nephi, chapters 8 through 11, it describes the people as sort of lying on the earth, moaning, and you just kind of, it fits in my mind this a feeling of a kind of a lethargic um, feeling that you could get at a lower oxygen concentration level. But anyway, with this understanding that you can suppress fire by lowering oxygen concentrations, but people can still breathe, they've proposed a fire suppression system where you control the oxygen concentration in places like bank vaults or where you're storing precious documents or things like that. And so you can't have a fire, but you need people to be able to go in and out at times. And so it makes you maintain that oxygen concentration between 10 to 16%, and people can go in, they can breathe, they can still operate, but it's a low enough oxygen concentration that you can't have a fire in there so that it would suppress any fire and prevent those critical places from catching fire or having burning there. So there is a scientific explanation for it. Does that work with 3rd Nephi chapter 8? The answer is yes. So how would there have been a low oxygen concentration? Well, that would occur potentially from the circumstances that are described right there in the destructions immediately preceding the inability to start a fire. So it talks about fires, multiple cities catching fire. Those fires use up some of the oxygen in the air. In addition, it talks about earthquakes and large earthquakes. When it causes the rocks to break up, what it does is it releases dust and gases from in the earth, which could be a void of oxygen. And so what you end up having is that release of dust and low oxygen gases ends up reducing temporarily the oxygen concentration in the air. Same kind of thing would be true for volcanoes if you accept a Mesoamerican setting instead of a Heartland setting. Volcanoes do the same thing, which is by releasing these underground low oxygen gases that then, seep around, that could temporarily reduce the oxygen concentration in the air. And so when it talks in 3rd Nephi about this vapor of darkness, that they could feel the vapor, to me, that indicates that it's something that would have this kind of dust and other stuff that kind of feels differently to them. So for me, it indicates something that scientifically fits and could be explained, but it could be explained only in ways that Joseph Smith wouldn't have understood. Joseph Smith, as a farm boy, probably would have never have experienced a situation where you would not be able to start a fire, even with, exceedingly dry wood. So the idea that he would propose something like this that turns out to be scientifically correct is another example of Joseph Smith either being a really great guesser or the fact that the Book of Mormon is true and inspired from God. All right. And as it says here, smoke here also same kind of thing, reduces the oxygen environment. Okay. So in conclusion, once again, the Book of Mormon fits the science on a bold claim that would not have been understood or comprehended by Joseph Smith or by people when the Book of Mormon was translated. Although Joseph Smith would have known that, yes, a fire needs air, he's unlikely to be familiar with any circumstances where a fire cannot be started with fine dry wood despite being exposed to air. All right, I'll go ahead and stop share there. Okay, so this is just another example that supports the truthfulness, historicity of the Book of Mormon. I wanted to get this out since we had covered this section recently in Come Follow Me. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them below, and I encourage you to like and subscribe. Thanks.